Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Regis Center for Art. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Howard Oransky, and I'm director of the Katherine E. Nash Gallery here in the Department of Art. Before we begin this program, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Minnesota sits on land that was stolen from the Dakota people by the government of the United States. The treaties of 1805, 1837, and 1851, through which the U.S. government claimed ownership, were riddled with fraud, deception, and coercion. In 1856, the U.S. Senate's Military Affairs Committee concluded that the 1805 treaty was, quote, never promulgated. In other words, President Jefferson never promulgated the treaty, which means it wasn't fully ratified, nor can it now be found upon the statute books like any other treaty, if indeed a treaty it may be called, nor were its stipulations ever complied with on the part of the United States. This, unquote. This information, along with additional supporting evidence documenting the theft of this land, can be found in an article written by Neil McKay and Monica Seams McKay for the Institute of Advanced Study at the University of Minnesota. We are here to celebrate the opening of 3 related exhibitions. Here in the Regis Center for Art, we are presenting a picture gallery of the soul in the Katherine E. Nash Gallery and the Student Scholar Projects, a collaboration with the Gordon Parks High School in the Quarter Gallery. And through a wonderful coincidence of timing, the Elmer L. Anderson Library is presenting The Eyes See What the Heart Feels from the archives of photographer and painter Adger Cowans. Deborah Ultan, who curated that exhibition, will tell us more about it when she introduces our special guest, Adger Cowans. I would like to thank our colleagues at the Gordon Parks High School who are here tonight: Tracy Gower, principal of the school; Eleanor Clemens, principal of the Evening High School; Paul Krieger, the Curriculum and Media Arts Coordinator; Chris Faust, a former member of the photography faculty; Robin Hickman Winfield, the great niece of Gordon Parks who teaches at the school; and Antonio Richardson, who works with Robin. I'd like our guests from the school to please stand so we can acknowledge you. Thank you. A picture gallery of the soul has been made possible by the generous support of the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation, an early and critical gift by Kate Nilsson and Stuart Nelson. In-kind support has been provided by Metropolitan Picture Framing and Blue Dot and the Givens Foundation for African American Literature. I'm also grateful to our donors Jane Bassick, Harriet Bart and Bruce Bart, and Mary Baumgartner. I would like to thank our publisher, the University of California Press, for their support and expertise, which has produced our wonderful exhibition catalog. The book. The University of Minnesota Bookstore has a table set up in the lobby tonight where you can buy copies of this beautiful book, which includes brilliant essays by Cheryl Finley, A.M. Crystal Nelson, Seth Rodney, and Deborah Willis. A picture gallery of the soul includes work by 111 artists. We are fortunate to have some of the artists here with us tonight: Jean-Andre Antoine, Adger Cowans, Mara Duvra, Tia Simone Gardner, Walter Griffin, Nance Muzinguzi, Bobby Rogers, and Kara Salmon. Did I miss anyone? Would the artists please stand so that we can thank you? Our program this evening is the second in a series of 4 events related to the exhibition. On October 12th, we will present a spoken word event with Ty Chapman, Kino Evil, and Andrea Jenkins. And on November 17th, we will present a writer's reading program with Mary Easter, G.E. Patterson, and Davu Seru. Andrea Jenkins and G.E. Patterson are here tonight. Please stand so that we may acknowledge you. All these events are presented with the technical expertise of our media staff. My thanks to Karen Hazelman and Adam Kerrigan. I would also like to thank our new gallery staff members, Catherine Blommel, Sarah Hubner-Burns, and Nick Nurburn, who are helping us run this program tonight. For the last several years, our gallery staff have been printing and framing works for this exhibition. Over the summer, our assistant curator, Therese Iacovino, and our undergraduate interns, Eleanor Mackenzie Stevenson and Des Bilges, installed 184 artworks in the gallery. These 3 individuals invested hundreds of hours in the preparation of this exhibition. I'm grateful for their commitment and hard work. Please come up here, I have little gifts for you. Therese, come on up. I would like to thank my wonderful life partner, Annette Igra, who has been her usual generous self, offering intellectual and emotional support every step of the way. She helped me think through historical issues. It helps to be married to an historian, especially if you work in a gallery. Gave me articles to read, referred artists for me to consider, and thoughtfully answered my oft-repeated question, which picture do you like better? This one or this one? A picture gallery of the soul began with an email that I received from Jim Gubernick, our facilities manager, on January 30th, 2014. Jim had met Louis Draper at Mercer Community College in New Jersey, where Draper had taught in the 1980s. And Jim suggested we organize an exhibition of Draper's work in the Katherine E. Nash Gallery. And I had never heard of Louis Draper. Then I saw an exhibition of his work at the Stephen Kasher Gallery in New York. It was beautiful. And I asked the gallery director if they would lend Draper's work to a group exhibition of Black American photographers at the University of Minnesota, and they agreed, and Louis Draper's name became the first name on the exhibition checklist. Thank you, Jim. In 2016, I invited my colleague, independent curator Herman J Milliken Jr. to join me as co-curators of the exhibition. Fortunately for me, he agreed. And we began to work together in earnest. After 6 years of work and 2 postponements due to the pandemic, we opened the doors to a picture gallery of the soul on September 13th. Herman is a collector and a curator of photography. He is president of the Givens Foundation for African American Literature. and he serves on the boards of just about every arts organization in the Twin Cities. If they don't have him on their board, you don't need to know about them. In addition to curating the exhibition with me, Herman curated the soundscape of over 100 musical selections, each one corresponding to a specific artwork in the exhibition catalog. Please welcome my co-curator, my colleague, my friend, Herman J. Milliken Jr.
Good evening and welcome. First, I'd like to really thank Howard for the partnership and the long-standing relationship that we've had. I first met Howard when he was hired by Katherine Holbrush at the Walker Art Center. And I served on the Community Advisory Committee for the Walker Art Center. So wanted to thank you for the introduction and for including me in this journey, very important journey. Before I introduce our first speaker, I wanted to let you know a while ago, I'll read this quickly. There's a certificate of recognition from Governor Tim Walz. The certificate is presented to the Katherine E. Nash Gallery, operated by the Department of Art at the University of Minnesota, in honor of organizing the exhibition, A Picture Gallery of the Soul, which includes the work of African Americans from Minnesota and across the United States. A Picture Gallery of the Soul represents a significant contribution to cultural life of all Minnesotans, engaging in the power of art to honor, celebrate, investigate, and interpret African American history, culture, and politics. Therefore, with the appreciation and respect of the people of Minnesota, this certificate is presented to the Katherine E. Nash Gallery. Thank you for your. So I believe it's a well-deserved honor. My role here is to introduce the first speaker, Cheryl Finley. On leave from Cornell University, Cheryl Finley is director of the Atlanta University Center Art History plus Curatorial Studies, collective and distinguished visiting professor in the Department of Art and Visual Culture at Spelman College. Cheryl Finley is associate professor of art at Cornell University. She holds a PhD in African American Studies and History of Art from Yale University. Her groundbreaking study, published in 2018 by Princeton University Press, committed to memory, the art of the slave ship icon, is the first in-depth study of the most famous image associated with the memory of slavery. This amazing book has just been released in a paperback edition this week. Her prolific critical attention to photography produced the co-authored publications Teenie Harris, Photographer, An American Story, Harlem, A Century in Images, Diaspora, Memory, Place, David Hammond, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, Pamela Z, and numerous essays and articles on artists such as Bernice Abbott, Walker Evans, Joy Gregory, Roshini Kempadu, Laura Simpson, Hank Willis Thomas, Carrie Mae Weems, and Deborah Willis. The exhibition she curated with Deborah Willis, Free as They Want to Be, Artists Committed to Memory, opens next week at the National Underground Railroad, Freedom Center's Skirkville Gallery in Cincinnati. Part of the photo-focused biennial, the exhibition runs through March 5/2023 and include the catalog published by Dimiani Editore. For our program this evening, Professor Finley will read the essay she wrote for our exhibition catalog, Mining the Archive of Black Life and Culture. Please welcome Professor Cheryl Finley.
Wow, it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much, Herman, for that beautiful and warm introduction. And Howard, you had me choked up, man. It's great to meet you. Great to meet you both, and thank you so much for inviting me here to Minneapolis and to meet everyone, but also to write for this wonderful, wonderful exhibition. I did have a moment to kind of tool through quickly, and I not only love the way that it's installed and the vision behind the curation of the show, but also the addition of the soundscape really makes it something that's memorable, and I think that's important. I would also just like to give a shout out to Karen Hasselman. Thank you so much for your help with the tech today, and Terez Iacovino. Thank you so much for your help with the slides, and also I'd like to acknowledge the interns and everyone here who's made this possible, especially the artists. And Adger, it's such an honor to be sitting next to you, and so I'd like to dedicate my talk to you. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to begin with an epigraph from none other than Frederick Douglass, who said, "Rightly viewed, the whole soul of man is a sort of picture gallery, a grand panorama in which all of the great facts of the universe, in tracing things of time and things of eternity, are painted." The great 19th century abolitionist and orator Frederick Douglass understood the power of photography and the archive better than most. In his oratory and advocacy, he used both the tools for social change and liberation, shifting perspectives and transforming lives. The passage that begins my essay, which I just read to you, is revelatory of a period at the start of the Civil War in 1861, when the very soul of the nation was under siege. Yet Douglass takes up the photograph and its archival uses in his lecture on pictures as a metaphor to signal concurrent battles over established and emerging media, forms of visual representation and presentation. The picture gallery versus the panorama, the painting versus the photograph, and how this unprecedented time of national crisis would be remembered and documented and archived. I'm showing you here just a couple of images that give you a sense of what a 19th century picture gallery would look like. And these are examples from the work of none other than James Presley Ball, who had daguerreotype galleries in Cincinnati, also here in Minneapolis, St. Helena, Washington. And he was quite an extraordinary man of the 19th century, working from about the 1940s until the end of his life, towards the end of the 19th century. And I think these give us a sense of this idea, which I love, for the title of the exhibition of this picture gallery. Douglass's specific reference to the picture gallery and the grand panorama demonstrates his deep knowledge of and personal experience with technological innovation and visual representation, notably photography and the presentation and circulation of images and ideas. It also serves as a rallying call for image makers and activists alike to harness these emergent tools of communication for the dawn of a new era. With his series on photography and essays on photography, Douglass set the stage for Black 19th century photographers to document generations of survivors of slavery, chart the progress of the race, and indeed guarantee the future. Photographers like C.M. Badou, whose 1893 seated portrait of Douglass captures the stalwart statesman in his sunset years, went on to make lasting portraits of Black leaders and intellectuals, including Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Paul Laurence Dunbar, among others. Badou's portraits of Black leaders frequently appeared on the covers of influential early 20th century Black publications, such as The Crisis, The Messenger, and Opportunity, while his status as official photographer at Tuskegee Institute following his predecessor, Arthur P. Badou, promised future generations of Black photographers through his pedagogy and example. Works by the Twin Cities photographers J.P. Ball in Minneapolis and Harry Shepard in St. Paul offer a local perspective on the responsibility and legacy of 19th century Black photographers. Ball, who was among the first generation of photographers in America, had studios in Cincinnati, Minneapolis, and Helena, Washington, boasting all forms of the medium, from daguerreotypes to cabinet cards. In addition to his celebrated national reputation, which attracted sitters like Douglass and others, including abolitionists, Ball was famously known to have created a large-scale, and this is just one of, I just wanted to pause here and show you one of his amazing photographs of Frederick Douglass, and this is from 1867 in albumen print. So what I was saying earlier, referring to one of his great accomplishments, and that is one of Ball's great accomplishments, he was famously known to have created a large-scale painted canvas panorama in Cincinnati titled The Mammoth Pictorial Tour of the United States, comprising views of the African slave trade, of the northern and southern cities, of cotton and sugar plantations, of the Mississippi, Ohio, Susquehanna rivers, Niagara Falls, etc., from 1855. And this is what we have remaining, we believe, from this amazing panorama. Many of us actually think that it's around there, it's somewhere, it's in someone's attic, it might be in an archive unidentified. Dr. Willis and I were in Cincinnati just last weekend installing our show that's opening, and we happened to be walking past Ball's studio on 4th Street, and there's this amazing, beautiful mural of him that's been painted there recently, and we started thinking about, well, where could that panorama be? So I hope that one day soon we find it. So Ball was a staunch abolitionist and a supporter of the Union Army during the Civil War, and he also later became the official photographer of the 25th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation held here in Minneapolis in 1887. He is represented in the exhibition by an exquisite carte de visite of Maddie Allen, dating from, and her dates from the date of the carte de visite is from 1874 to 1877. And you can see that in her three-quarter pose, revealing Ball's innate talents as a studio photographer, that we can see the kind of work that he would have done in his studio, no matter what the medium. Both Ball and Shepard originally hailed from Virginia. Shepard was active from 1880 to 1905 in St. Paul, where he operated the first Black-owned studio, the People's Photography Gallery, and several other studios, infusing his practice with the portraits of men of prominent political stature, such as Frederick L. McGee, the first Black lawyer in Minnesota, and an organizer of the Niagara movement with Du Bois. Shepard's most notable commission came from Thomas Callaway of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., to make portraits akin to the formal three-quarter bust shown in the exhibition of McGee for the critically acclaimed American Negro exhibit. at the 1900 Paris Exposition Universelle. Thomas A. Askew provided similar portraits of African Americans from his native Georgia for albums commissioned by Du Bois for the same show, uplifting Black progress despite the failures of Reconstruction and the landmark Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision of 1896, codifying Jim Crow laws that would endure for the next half-century. Together, their art and activism served as fodder for Black artists and photographers of the 20th and 21st centuries to develop powerful mnemonic aesthetic practices, foregrounding archival images in their contemporary works as catalysts of memory, activism, and determination. At the dawn of the 20th century, Black photographers continued to document Black life and culture in cities and rural communities around the country. Addison Scurlock moved from Fayetteville, North Carolina to Washington, D.C. in 1900 and opened a photography studio on Popular U Street in 1911. His family firm served ordinary folks, politicians, and celebrities and enjoyed a coveted role as staff photographers for Howard University. Scurlock's pride in his practice can be seen in a telling self-portrait, which demonstrates his technical expertise with large format studio cameras and his attention to the detail of lighting Black subjects. From New Orleans, Arthur P. Badou enjoyed a long career focusing on individuals of note in the South and the activists of prominent historically Black colleges and universities, including Tuskegee Institute and Xavier University. For 7 years, from 1908 to 1915, Badou, taking over for Maddie, was the personal photographer to Tuskegee's Booker T. Washington, creating the most memorable and dynamic images of this captivating leader. Badou was highly attuned to an evolving Black political sphere, and his photographs of Washington and Marcus Garvey show how he used his camera for the purposes of social change. The Black press was an important outlet for disseminating news and information to segregated Black communities around the country in the 20th century. Photographs that accompanied news stories or stood on their own enabled generations of Black people to take pride in their self-images. Following his service in World War II, John F. Glanton returned to Minneapolis and opened a photography studio catering to families and to the community. His untitled portrait of a young woman and her record albums gives a sense of stylish vernacular images and the kinds of images that he made, showing the popularity of Black music in households. And I wonder if this image was an inspiration for the soundscape that we hear in the exhibition. Just a thought. Glanton's photographs were published widely in the Twin Cities Black press, including the Minneapolis Spokesman and the St. Paul Recorder. Charles Teeny Harris enjoyed a more than 35-year career in the popular Pittsburgh Courier, known for its documentary photographs and sophisticated marketing finesse around the country. Harris regularly photographed in and around the Hill District of Pittsburgh, capturing the work and the lives of and leisure time of the City of Steel's workers and performers. And so I want to just kind of turn to another section of my essay for the catalog titled Mining the Archive. Several of the artists in the exhibition working in the late 20th century and today employ what I have called a mnemonic aesthetic practice, mining the archive of historical photographs to create works that relate to the past to the present. In many cases, their works are realized as collages that involve multiple photographic images and multiple media. Krista Franklin's In Heaven from 2008 combines loving family portraits, a father and son reading, a young girl, a mother carrying a tray of drinks, with the portrait of Frederick Douglass and images of clouds and mixed media collage that serves as a memorial. Conceptual artist Hank Willis Thomas digitally collaged reporter James Spider Martin's documentary photographs of the Selma to Montgomery marches onto mirrored surfaces in Bury Me Standing from 2016, which invite and demand that viewers see themselves in the history and the passing of time. In other works, Keisha Bruce's Begotten from 2008, from the series Recalling and Retelling, was inspired by a historical image of enslaved children. In this sepia-toned archival pigment print, the artist frames the inspirational photograph in the simple shape of a house, which she places on a background with the words from the biblical book of Matthew, tracing the genealogy of Jesus. The works of Thomas and Bruce show how the narrative practice of mnemonic aesthetics frequently uses documentary images precisely to reveal historical truths that impact, if not drive, social justice movements. In other examples, artists like Nona Faustine and Rashid Johnson use their own bodies, their own portraits to uncover little-known histories or to reify influential historical figures. In Faustine's Ye Are My Witness Van Brunt Slave Cemetery site in Brooklyn from 2018, her body, covered only by a white sheath blowing in the wind, marks this controversial site hidden from history for far too long. In Johnson's self-portrait with my hair parted like Frederick Douglass, and we see the Frederick Douglass theme here, and others, he reaches back in time to personify great African-American leaders from history. In other works in the exhibition, historical familial images are centered in works of memorialization, honoring ritual practice and generational legacy. For example, Albert Chong's Miss Peggy from 2015 honors her legacy by decorating her formal studio portrait from the 1950s with the purple and white flowers, illuminating family photographs, and his roots in Jamaica with talismanic objects found in nature. Atlanta-based artist Radcliffe Bailey often incorporates historic family photographs and those that he's collected, notably tintypes and other 19th century processes, in his mixed media works. In 4, the upper half of this large-scale mixed media work reveals the portrait of a woman from a 19th century tintype. Another work by Bailey called Tricky bears the ghostly figure of a man wearing a top hat looking straight at the viewer through a spiritual haze, projecting the sense of a long-ago memory. Both Chong and Bailey frequently employ ritual practices in their works of photography, installation, and sculpture, whether through the manipulation of the photographic process, use of historic images, or incorporation of other meaningful symbols to create the overall work. A picture gallery of the soul offers a dramatic and joyful survey, and I want to underscore that, dramatic and joyful survey of African American photography with a special focus on the portrait and its role in identity formation, social change, and community activism. Timely in its mounting, this historical survey shows the lasting impact of some of the 19th century's seminal Black photographers and images on its counterparts of the next 2 centuries, foregrounding the portrait's pivotal role in documenting moments of national reckoning, including the turbulent times in which we live today. For example, Vanessa Charlot's Love and Struggle from 2020 takes the setting of one of the many Black Lives Matter sit-ins of the last year. Sorry, I missed a line. Let me start over again. I thought I saw a typo, and I know there's not a typo. Okay. For example, it's so good I have to say it twice. For example, Vanessa Charlot's Love and Struggle from 2020 takes the setting of one of the many Black Lives Matter sit-ins of the last year to zero in on a masked couple taking solace in each other, a handmade, quote, "no justice, no peace" sign giving way to their sense of purpose. The work of Mark Clinton in Untitled from 2020 highlights the intergenerational nature of the ongoing political struggle, documenting the moment for his 3-year-old daughter and also for posterity. As Douglass demonstrated in his writings and by his example, to have one's portrait made is a form of self-determination and self-preservation. Armed with cameras in their hands, the Black photographers exhibited here not only document the historical record, they also embed themselves within it through radical and intentional acts of self-portraiture, as in the works by Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, John Penderhughes, Corrine Simpson, and Kwame Brathwaite. Thus, if a photographic portrait is evidence of humanity's perseverance, despite the odds, a testament to having been there, then documentation of Black life and culture, of beauty, triumph, failure, art, music, place, and education, proposes a mode of photographic practice that uses memory as an aesthetic tool, uniting communities, sharing stories, creating possibility, and forging pathways to sustainable Black futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that great talk. So you had the question about the soundscape. Howard did a exhibition called Minnesota Funk. What year was it? 2012? So 12. So he knew I had a collection of music. So he calls me up and says, "Oh, I want you to pair music to the work in the show." So what I did, I paired the music with one piece per artist, because otherwise it was going to be. And then I actually gave the lecture, and then, so when we were talking about this exhibition, the idea came up again, and so we just incorporated it into it. And my business partner, Chris Berger, from the Fulton Group, what he does, he did for us is there's a scan there, so you can go to Spotify, and then you can go to Spotify and then listen to the track as you go through the gallery. Okay. All right, so I'm here this evening with the great pleasure to introduce Deborah Ultan, and I'm really pleased to introduce her. In May, I went to the Gordon Parks Foundation dinner in New York, and I went to the International Center for Photography. They had a photo book fair, and there, you'll know about this group that's coming up in her talk. They were having they were selling books, and one of the books was a publication on like Adger Cowans. And then she was telling me they were coming to Minneapolis, but I didn't know, I hadn't heard about they were coming to Minneapolis at the same time that we were doing this exhibition. But but it worked out. So I am pleased to introduce Deborah Ultan, who will introduce Adger Cowans, one of the photographers in our exhibition, and a member of the Kamoinge collective of Black photographers that was founded in 1963 in Harlem, New York. As the Arts and Design Librarian with advanced studies in the fine arts, art history, theater, and dance, and architecture, Deborah oversees the acquisitions and support of teaching and research in all of these areas. She has taught and continues to teach large lecture and seminar classes about research methods and strategies from a multidisciplinary perspective that incorporates all formats, including digital and including special collections. She works with the faculty, students, affiliated university patrons, and non-university researchers at all levels of their research in terms of their research inquiries. Her own research and writing is focused on library collections and social justice in the arts, the performative arts, photography, and artist books. Ultan has just opened an exhibition that I just referred to at the Elmer Anderson Library called The Eyes See What the Heart Feels, from the archives of photographer and painter Adger Cowans, whose work also appears in our exhibition. This exhibition is in cooperation with Stephen Alvahari, who is the publisher, and Pam Clark, the co-editor of the 21st editions, who have recently, and the university has recently published the work of Cowans in a special book, which you know is on sale, outside. So please join me in welcoming Deborah Ultan.
Thank you so much, Herman. So my job title is interesting. I am the Arts and Design Librarian, but I also oversee the collection in our special collections, the Francis B. Gorman Rare Arts Book and Media Collection. And part of that collection, we, a few years ago, acquired the complete works of the 21st editions. And our newest book that we acquired as part of that collection is Adger. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. And I'll tell you a little bit about our exhibit, and I'm going to introduce you to Adger. So I have a lot of responsibilities right now. I'm also coming off of just having opened our exhibit over in Anderson Library. So you'll have to excuse me, I failed to get an image in on time as we were finishing up final details for the exhibit over in Anderson Library. We also had a panel discussion this morning, which was quite lively and very exciting, and Herman and Howard were both there, and Adger, and Stephen and Pam, speaking about, okay, so here's the book. So I don't have a slide, but I at least have the book, and you'll see it out in the lobby as well. And we also spoke about Adger and his period of time working with the Kamoinge Workshop. So I'm just going to make a few notes about our exhibit so you get a little picture of what's there, and then I'll give you a little biography for Adger. And then I think what I hope that you'll do is take the time to go over the exhibit so you can really soak it in, and you'll get to meet Adger in a minute. All right, so in a complimentary exhibition to the Picture Gallery of the Soul, over in Anderson Library is The Eyes See What the Heart Feels, from the archives of the master photographer and painter Adger Cowans. The exhibit is an intimate presentation of the artist's personal archives alongside his work, and you can explore the glimpses of his life via his personal sketchbooks, notebooks, photographic studies, painting experiments, journal writings, and correspondence from mentors and colleagues. His 3 treasured cameras on display leave you wondering about the profound stories that they hold about the photographer and his subjects. So the exhibit could not have happened without a couple or a few more than a couple people. So first of all, I owe a huge thanks to Stephen Alvahari. I'd like you to stand, Stephen. He is the publisher of 21st edition. And I'll just note, in a few years, we'll be doing a complete show, an exhibition of all of, well, not all of the books. We'll do a selection of the books from that collection, which you will be delighted to see, because the publisher focuses on the art of the book and the art of photography and the history of photography. So you'll be delighted to get to know that. I think, is Pam here? Oh, there you are, Pam. Production designer, kind of Stephen's associate. So please stand up, Pam. They have gotten to know Adger, and Stephen has been the archivist of Adger's archives. And we have been working together on pulling everything together for what could go on display for our exhibit. So that's been a huge and amazing collaboration between all of them. And then I'd really like to acknowledge my assistant curator, Barbara Cox. Please stand up. Thank you. She is known in the area for her book on how to read art and her amazing knowledge of jazz music. So in getting to know Adger, you'll understand that he has a deep relationship to jazz and took photographs of jazz greats that you all know of, and you've probably seen his iconic photographs all over, maybe just not knowing that they were photographed by Adger Cowans. So, in the exhibit, you will see selections from these archives that include these ephemera, such as autobiographical renderings, correspondence, and photos from his jazz greats, from his work in Hollywood, and political figures that garnered his attention and were influential to him. As much as Cowans documented the Black experience, he did so with attention to the art of photography and with an eye for movement, abstraction, light, and shadow. The breadth of his engagement and impact within art circles, people, and institutions is tremendous. Essential to his life's work and career were the 2 artist groups that formed to support and give voice to African American artists, especially at the beginning of the Black arts movement. These were the Kamoinge Workshop and Afro-Cobra. Cowans was one of the founding members of the Kamoinge Workshop, and with his academic background, modeled how the workshop could facilitate formal critiques to better the work and focus attention of the members. That has since had lasting impact. He joined the Chicago group Afro-Cobra, African Commune of Bad Relevant Artists, because of their unorthodox style, independence, and purpose to create work for and of the African American people. Celebrating Adger. Oh, wait 1 second. That's my final statement. Okay. I just want to throw in a few other words about Adger so you understand. So first of all, he's one of the first African American students to earn a degree in photography from Ohio University in 1958. He furthered his education at the School of Motion Picture Arts and School of Visual Arts in New York City. Following his graduation, he was invited by Gordon Parks to serve as his apprentice and assistant photographer at Life magazine. Cowans later served in the United States Navy and served as their photographer. And then he continued on to explore and work as photographer while also becoming a prolific painter, which you will see some of the paintings displayed in the gallery. Now I get to read my final sentence. So, celebrating Adger is an opportunity to embody this musically attuned, playful, and contemplative personality, and to study his artistic process and poésie is an opportunity as well for our institution to embody our mission to promote and immerse ourselves in diversity widely and visibly. Let's please welcome Adger Cowans. Okay, and I think my third responsibility is to move the slides ahead.
I don't know. This is very big surprise to me. I didn't know I was going to have to talk. I thought they were going to show the pictures and just talk about the work, but now they tell me I have to talk. And I'm not very good at talking. They don't think so. But I think that for me, first of all, I would like to talk about this exhibition, which I think is probably, in my lifetime, I've never seen an exhibition of this quality across the board, of this many photographers ever in my whole career. And I just turned 86 years old. So that give you some idea about the history of photography. You know, I studied at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, with Clarence H. White, Jr., whose father was Clarence H. White, Sr., who was one of the artists that Stieglitz showed in his gallery. Stieglitz is considered the father of American photography. So my sense of photography always had to do with personal expression and with the heart. So that's kind of where I came from. In 1958, there were, I think Ohio University was the only school that gave a degree in photography in America, across the board. Arizona State, I think, had a program, I think, 2 or 3 years, but they actually said in their literature that they did not admit Negroes. You have to understand, photography was not an art at the time I came on the scene. It was considered a craft. In fact, when my mother told my father I wanted to study photography, he said, "What are you talking about? You're going to study photography. That's a hobby. That's not it's not a job." And there were no books on photography or photographers at that time. Across the board, even though great photography was being done, there were no books on Ansel Adams or Edward Weston or any of the great photographers. It happened later on, after Ansel Adams was on the cover of Time magazine. That was 1979. And he sold a photograph called Moonrise over Hernandez for $1,500, and everybody went crazy. You know, who's going to pay that much for a photograph? That's ridiculous. You know, and now you think of a photographer selling photographs for $50,000 and up. So it was a time of change. It was a time of photographers and painters deciding on, well, is photography an art or not? And there were lots of arguments in New York. Galleries did not show photography. They showed paintings, you know, sculpture, but if you came with photographs, they would say, oh, you can make another one of that. But they didn't understand that each photograph that you made at that time, this is before digital, would be different. So anyway, I never wanted to be famous. I never wanted to be involved in getting my work out there. I worked under wraps. I did a lot of work, and I felt that that was the job. The rejection that I received did not sit well with me. I didn't deal good with rejection. So I decided I would leave that alone. I wouldn't take my work around to galleries and to places, and so I couldn't do it. It was too hard on me personally. I'm very sensitive. So I put all that energy into my work because I learned from Gordon Parks to take negative energy and turn it into positive power. So that was what I did, and I continued that. Thank you. So now we're going to look at some pictures. Oh, okay. This is Sean Walker, who was a member of the Kamoinge Workshop. When I came to the Kamoinge Workshop in 1961, it was, Ray called me and said, we got a small group of guys up here that want to learn photography. Most of these guys at that time were amateur photographers. They had not been educated or been to school. I think Lou Draper had studied with Eugene Smith, so he had some knowledge of photography. But most of the other guys, I think Al worked as a glazier. Sean was out on the street selling stuff. And Tony Barbosa's aunt brought me to him. He said, oh, he wants to be a photographer because he's a bad boy in school and he's messing up, you know. So I met Tony, and so this series, that reflection that Sean Walker did, was based on some ideas that I gave him from reflections that I had done, and he took it and ran with it. I gave him a 28mm lens, and he never looked back. I think most of Sean's work is done with the 28mm lens. GP. Gordon did not like to be photographed. And, you know, most photographers don't want to be in front of the camera. And so on all those years, I said, Gordon, I'm going to take a shot at it, you know. So I'd always have my camera, and if I picked it up, he'd look at me, but Gordon Parks looked like, And I said, well, you know, Pops, come on, you know. So this particular day, and this is later, this is 1985. And he let me do this shot. And he was talking, and he had his pipe. And when he touched his other hand to it, I thought, great, that really made it come together. And so I showed it to him, and he actually liked the photograph. He uses it somewhere in his papers. But Gordon was a very talented man. He was very much like my father in the sense that he was a hard worker. Gordon would work all night sometimes, you know. And I mean, I'd be over to the house, and I'd have to sleep on the couch, but, you know, and he would ask me to look at things that he was doing and what I felt about him as a photographer. So he was a mentor. He was like my creative father, so to speak. And after Gordon Parks Jr. died, we really got to be very close. I talked to him almost every day. But he was a great man and a great artist in so many different ways, you know. He composed music. He composed all the music for a lot of his work. He also was a piano player. He was a poet. He was a great film director. I mean, Shaft was the first film that he did, was just fantastic. And he wrote a book called The Sun Stalker. It was a great book. You still find it out there. It's about the English painter. Yeah, exactly. Great book.
And he loved you very much.
Thank you.
He loved you very much.
Thank you. This is Malcolm X. You know, Gordon went up to photograph the nation, and he had to deal with them. He had to deal with them, and at first they were like, you know, you work for the white man, what are you doing up here, trying to do pictures on us, and you're going to expose, et cetera, et cetera. But he finally, you know, got in there because Gordon was humanitarian. He really cared about people, and he cared about black people. He cared about all people. So he kind of got in there. Mr. Muhammad didn't want him to do it at first, but he worked his way in, and he became very good friends with Malcolm X and became the goddaughter to Malcolm's children. Lou Draper. Lou Draper was a very sweet man. He cared, and he was always very engaging to photographers who were coming up and wanted to do stuff. I was the hard one in the group, you know. I was like critical. Hey, don't put that up. That's not photography. Lou would always find something positive. But I was always like, you know, learn how to print, you know, it's not spotted, you know, all the technical things. Because I had been to school and I had learned the latest techniques of photography at that time. You know, if you studied with a photographer at that time, then you would learn from him and he would help you get jobs, et cetera. So having a degree, in fact, when I told Gordon I had a degree, he said, "What is that?" I said, "It's a degree from college." He said, "They have college degrees?" And he said, that's very interesting, you know. He said he never, you know, and a lot of people said that to me when I came to New York and said, you know, I went to see Avedon, and he looked at my work, and he said, "This is beautiful work." He said, "Who printed this?" I said, "I printed it." He said, "You printed these pictures?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You look like you're 19 years old." I said, "I'm 22. You know, I have a family." But a lot of people thought I was very young for the kind of pictures that I was doing. Tony Barbosa's photograph when he was in the Navy. You know, he wanted to be a photographer. First camera he had was a Spartus camera, which is like a box camera. And I told him, you know, you better go get a camera first. You know, I said, "That's not a camera," you know. And he argued with me. I said, "It's not a camera." So then he went to the Navy and he learned a little more there and he came back. And I actually fought for Tony to be in the group, Sean too, because Tony didn't have a portfolio. But I felt his energy that he would be a really good photographer. So I fought for him to be in the group. And when he went to the Navy, this is one of his great photographs. Herb Robinson was a studio photographer. He worked photographing still lifes of perfume and bottles and things like that. And he was very good at it with lighting and stuff. But he wasn't a street photographer. So when he came to the group, I said, you gotta shoot the people, man. What are you doing? We're not interested in the perfume bottles, you know. It's cute, you know, it's great, you know, but you gotta get out there and feel with the people. And so finally he got his act together and he started shooting things in the street. He was very, very afraid at first to go out into the street because he felt that he was going to be beat up on, you know, going in these communities because he was very shy and he stuttered a little bit. So he was very, you know, and I said, "Get out there, man. You'll be all right." And he did. I met Ming Spitzer when she was about 5 years old. Her father was a pharmacist at Tyler's drugstore where I worked as a soda jerk. I was probably 15, 16, something like that, and she was just a little girl. And years later, I said, you know, I met you when you were like a baby, you know. But she came into the group through Tony Barbosa. They were a couple at one point, and she would sit and listen to our conversations. You know, she wouldn't be there in the meeting, but she would be on the side listening to our conversations about what photography is and what it can do. And so finally one day, Louis said, "Let me see some of your photographs." And she was, "Oh, no, I didn't." He said, "Yeah, let me see, you know." And she put a photograph up, and he said, "Well, I think you should be in a group." That's how she got in the group. But it wasn't about her. A lot of people asked the question, what was it like for you to be the first black woman in this group? It wasn't about that. It was about her being a photographer. It was about the work that she was doing. It wasn't about that she was a woman and the only one. She was just like one of the guys, so to speak. So Ming became very street stuff, very heady, what I call kind of photographs, very interior kind of work. Oh, Carrie Mae Weems. Carrie Mae Weems, I met her first when she came from California, and she wasn't really a photographer at that point. And she worked with Tony, and I photographed her putting up some of her work, and became very good friends. She liked my work a lot. And she really, really worked at trying to do something that was a little bit different, you know, kind of a story kind of thing. And she really worked at it, and she became really good. At first, a lot of the guys looked at her work and said, no, there's nothing happening here. What is this? But she really began to find her own way, and I think she is one of the great American photographers.
You're done.
I'm done. Okay. Thank you. The book. No, that book. This book is a very special book in the sense that it's all black. All the pages are black, right? Steve talked with me about this, and we went on, and he decided what was going to be in the book in terms of the photographs. And I trusted him to pick out the things that struck him. And we went through lots of changes with the ink and printing, et cetera, et cetera. So they finally, all of these pages, you can't leave a fingerprint on it because they're all coated with Teflon. Number one. Number two, the writing, the erasure poetry. This is a book of discovery because there are no names or dates on the photographs. I wanted people to understand the image and not rely on, well, it's a bird on a tree eating an apple. I wanted you to look at the photograph and experience that without any words. So that was another thing. And the other thing of discovery, the black writing in this book, you can't see it unless you tilt it toward the light, which is a discovery that you have to find out for yourself. But I've given you the secret now. But this is a very special book. There's a limited edition book which comes with 2 platinum prints, and then there's a regular edition. You can see them outside. And that's Steve Alvahari right there. And I think this is one of the water photographs. And when she was like, I want this photograph on the cover, she fought for it. So this was a book of love and a book of, I don't know, just trust and love. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we were planning on having a few questions, if you're up for that. We've gone for a little more than an hour, but if everybody's interested, we'll stay in the room for a few more minutes for a few questions. I just need to move this piece of furniture. And I see Karen is coming around. And I'd like to ask our 4 guests to come up and take a place up here. Herman, Deborah, Adger, and Cheryl up here. Thank you. Now, when we first started, Robin, were you here when I first started the program? Okay. All right. So at the beginning of the program, is the mic on?
Use that one.
This one? So at the beginning of the program, I explained that we have the 3 exhibitions here, the one in the Nash Gallery, the collaborative project in the Quarter Gallery with the students at the Gordon Parks High School, and Deborah talked about her exhibition. And I introduced our colleagues from the Gordon Parks High School.
I heard that, yep.
Did you hear me?
Behind you, yep, I sure did.
Okay, because I wasn't sure if you were here for that part.
It was.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
All right, good. I just wanted to make sure.
That's gracious.
Okay, good. All right. Good. Before we do the questions, I want to just follow up on one thing, which was when Cheryl showed the beautiful photograph by John Glanton and theorized, well, maybe this was the motivation for the soundscape. And then when Herman was up and Herman was explaining, oh, well, you know, some years ago, Howard and I worked together on this project called Minnesota Funk, and Herman had curated a selection of music for that exhibition. And so, of course, when we were working on this project, I was very hopeful that Herman would do that again. He ended up doing it for 111 artists, which was a mammoth project. But I'll just tell you my one little story, if it's okay, that I love to tell. I'll just never forget how I met Herman, which he mentioned that Walker Art Center had a community advisory committee, and Herman was on that committee because Herman's on every committee. And I was the staff liaison to this committee. So there we are talking one day, and I don't know how it happened, but somehow we started talking about jazz. And Herman mentioned that he has a jazz collection. He didn't tell you he has the largest collection of recorded jazz in the state of Minnesota, probably, a massive collection of jazz. And so we were talking, and I gave him a little quiz question. So when I was, in college, I had a friend who was a big jazz fan, and he would take me to jazz concerts and play jazz records for me, and he educated me about jazz. So he turned me on to Jackie Mclean, this saxophone player, who was brilliant, but not so famous, not like John Coltrane is so famous, right? So there I am talking with Herman, and he says, yeah, I've got this great jazz collection. It's like, okay, I'm gonna ask him a trick question. So I said, okay, do you have any records by Jackie Mclean? And he said to me, I have every record ever recorded by Jackie Mclean except one. And I thought, this is the guy. So that's the story of the beginning of this curating the music to the exhibitions that we've done together. So now time for a few questions for our guests. Anybody have a question you'd like to ask? Yes, back here.
Just talk with no mic.
Oh,
Is there an extra mic? And, I think it's coming right now. Thanks a lot. Oh, she's grabbing them. Okay.
Audio check.
We can share it.
Hi, my name is Nance. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. I'm one of the artists featured in the show. Just very overwhelmed and very excited to be here. I was very enthralled by this kind of work. I was introduced to this work by Deborah Willis's Reflections in Black documentary film and book in 2014. It took me on a very long journey that has brought me here, and just very, very overwhelmed by the emotion that I'm experiencing right now. My question is for all of you, is what is the role of memory and perspective? Who is creating the work? Whose voice is being centered? Who's being seen and how they're being seen and how they're being remembered? How important is that to your work and your approach to curating, to making images, to examining and creating new knowledge for people to take with them and create context for people to better understand Black life that has been so abstracted and so distorted in media that this photographic art form has been kind of the only powerful, really authentic form of expression that has allowed people who have been so subjected to reclaim their power back. And I'm also curious of the role of memory and how memory is omitted, and how we like to soften tension in images to please or accommodate audiences. You know, I heard when we were talking about the uprisings about how you know, these images evoke certain emotions that are kind of away from pain. But even echoing Adger's comment about how Gordon understood taking negative energy and turning it to positive power. Articulating pain for Black people is very powerful. So remembering that as a part of our joy and celebrating how we remember. So the question, going back to it, is how important is memory to your work, particularly perspective and how people are being seen and being perceived?
Want to start?
Start, or do you want to start?
You go ahead.
We're gonna fight over who starts. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question, and also thank you for echoing Dr. Willis's work and influence, I think, on so many of us here in this room. When I think about the role of memory, and I'm an art historian, so I write about art, I write about photography. At one time, many years ago, I used to make photographs, but I don't really do that anymore. But when I think about memory, I write about memory as an aesthetic tool. And one of the things that I say is that many artists, and the ones that I've written about in the exhibition that we are so excited to see today, but other artists that I've written about in other essays, that by being able to use memory as an aesthetic tool in one's work, it enables artists to relate their own personal experiences to those of a larger community, and also to other history. So the personal becomes something that is universal, and has the power to become something that's universal and healing. But at the same time, when I look at contemporary artists of today, that there's many artists who are going back to the archive, whether it's the photographic archive or whether it's the written historical archive. And often that work becomes fodder in a mnemonic sense, using memory for creating works that relate to the present. And so sometimes it's taking a historical image and reworking it in such a way that it makes it relevant to something that's happening now. And I think that in some of the images that we've seen in the exhibition, and other works by contemporary artists, working in photography in particular, but I think even in other mixed media and installation and film as well, that it's a powerful way, especially when we're looking at the role of social justice and really trying to elevate and shine a light on how histories of the past can repeat themselves, but also how we can heal from images if we are able to use those mnemonic touchstones to relate them to our present day. I hope that is helpful and answers some of the question that you were asking around memory. But I think it's crucial, it's important, and it relates, I think, even just to the foundation of the medium of photography, of course, but I think how Black artists have exhibited this ability to innovate on the medium through the use of memory. Like if you look at the work of Rashid Johnson, for example, or Hank Willis Thomas, he grew up, Deborah Willis's son, grew up in the archive with her at the Schomburg or in other parts of the New York Public Library as a kid, and has always kind of gone back to whether it's newspaper images, advertising, photographs, to be able to use those images to speak to what's happening and what he's seeing today in his community, especially when he does work that centers around images of and also the conditions of Black manhood. So I could go on and on, but I want to pass the mic to my colleagues here.
I can follow a little bit with just coming from the perspective of being a librarian, and the idea, especially that you'll see in the Anderson Library, is that letting the archive tell the story. And so when you're working with that primary material, you can then piece together from the source and everything around it. So you're building context, so you're not landing on an interpretation. And so as a librarian, I feel like it's my responsibility to make sure that these kinds of primary materials are really available and cared for and preserved. So it's forming memory beyond me telling you what is in the library for the memory. It's letting you form your ideas about what you're seeing in the context, and either the artist or the person who the archive is from.
Yeah, I would, thank you, say there was one image, Moira Duvra, and she's laying in the water. She's laying in the water, and she's looking up, and so you could bring a lot of questions about that, but it looks like she's thinking or reflecting about something, right? And so that one photograph is, to me, about a memory maybe she's experiencing, and she's communicating that with her lying in the water, looking up into the sky. So that might be like one example for me. It's like the photographer at the, part of the role is basically to communicate to us basically what they are intending. And I think that's the really great ones. You can come up with various points of view about that one image, but it does relate to like the memory. Then one thing that you mentioned in your show, I think there was the one where they had the historical complexity of the different images, like in heaven, and the collage, right? And that's a collage over time, as well.
And that image of Frederick Douglass, I thought I would maybe bring us back to the recurring Frederick Douglass theme, but is in that collage in heaven from 2008. And I think if we look at what he wrote about and what he spoke in his oratory, especially around photography, I think most people who may think of Douglass think of him as, the great abolitionist, as someone who, freed himself, self-emancipation, wrote his own autobiography, et cetera, his emancipator, newspaper, all of that. But in addition to that, he wrote extensively about photography and theorized photography in a way where he was reflecting upon memory and its power to be able to be taken into one's own hands to represent oneself, not just in the present, but also, I think, in the future and for perpetuity. And the last note, I would say, the show that Deb and I have opening next week in Cincinnati, the title is "Free as They Want to Be," and that's a sort of an excerpt of a quote from James Baldwin. Yes. And then after the colon, sometimes I don't really care for the colon, but we have one. Artists committed to memory, and so we're looking at artists, and again, Frederick Douglass, he's our man. I mean, he's in this amazing work that Isaac Julian has done recently, where he's reimagined, the life of Frederick Douglass and his wife, his studio, doing this really, really detailed photography and multi-screen film work, where it's even down to the costume design and the texture of the threads and the material, that you get the sense of Douglass and this, period 19th century feeling, as if you're stepping into one of J.P. Ball's studios. And actually there's a scene where he goes in to be photographed by J.P. Ball, and we saw that photograph today. And even one last example I would add, just from that, that recent experience, and we just installed the show, so it's very fresh in my mind, is the work by Bisa Butler, her portrait of Frederick Douglass, based on a famous 19th century photographic portrait of Douglass, but she's made a quilt. And so her quilts that have this very sort of photorealist imaging, but a lot of her work is based on historical images and the archive, the power of the archive to come back and grab your memory.
Did you want to speak, Adger?
Whoa. I don't like to go back. I'm not interested in memory. I'm interested in going forward, another kind of memory. I'm more interested in the spiritual aspect of what we are and what we do. We're all part of what's in the universe. I think we've been bamboozled as people to fit into religious categories, political and educational categories. You go to school to learn something, to get a job, to raise a family, grandchildren, and then you die. I don't like it. I never liked it. When I was a child, I wanted to be rain. I wanted to be sunshine. I wanted to be other things. I didn't like human beings. I thought human beings were complicated, mixed up. They lie, they cheat, they do all these things that human beings do. I was more interested in the spiritual aspect of human life. What is it that we all have as human beings? What is our power? Forget what's out there. What is the little voice inside of you telling you what to do? That's the memory I'm interested in. Where are we going? Who are we? What is this? All human beings. It's outside of race. It's outside of color. It has to do with the power that you have as a human being. That is your power. And when you tap into that power, whatever's going on outside doesn't matter, because you're grounded in something that's universal, that has been here forever. And I'm more interested in that, because all the other things, you're just, as far as I'm concerned, you're repeated patterns. Repeated patterns. I don't like repeated patterns. I want to go, the water photographs that I have over there has to do with you remembering, if you want to use that word, who you were as an amoeba, or what you were in the past. That connection to water. We are 75% water. When you go to the ocean and you hang out at the ocean, how do you feel when you come home? You feel great. Nature will heal you. You don't have to say, heal me. You don't have to say, look at something and go on a trip about the present, the past, or any of that. To me, it's interesting. Some people need to do that because that's how they understand human life. Something happens, somebody writes about it, they read about it, they understand from that point of view. But I'm more interested in exploring what doesn't exist. I want to go to the future. I want to see what's inside this thing. What is the power? We all have blood. We all bleed when we're cut. We're all connected to everything in the universe. What is that memory? Where do we go with that? It's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay. I just want to make one quick point before we go to our next question. You'll be our next question, which is to say that so we'll have one more question after this, and then I think we'll be done. Our first questioner, Nance Muzunguzi, who asked our first question, Nance? Okay. I just wanted to point out for the rest of our folks here that there's a photograph in the exhibition that Nance made, and it's in the center space of the gallery. And in this photograph, you see this young father, to me he's young, and he's holding his baby up to his chest. So it's this very beautifully composed, beautiful image of this fatherly love. And then if you look a little bit more up in the corner, you can see it's out of focus because of the depth of field, but you can see it says Cup Foods up on the sign. And Cup Foods is the place where George Floyd was killed by the Minneapolis police. And that photograph was taken, a day or 2 days after? Next afternoon. Okay. So this is a remarkable bringing together of this resistance and this love. And this image is now part of the archive. One more question, and then we'll be done. Back here. Yeah.
Hi, you guys. My name is Kenyelle Gray. I'm actually a former student of Gordon Parks High School, graduate year of 2018 to 2019. My question for you guys, just to let you know, I go to film school right now. About my first year, I just got into it. I'm a digital cinematography student, so pretty soon I'm gonna be filming. I kind of fell in love with that by going to Gordon Parks High School. I was in a photography class. Mr. Faust, that was my teacher. One thing, getting into film, I definitely was actually what you said, Adger, like expressing yourself, not worrying about like the negativity as far as art. So the question I had for all of you guys was, what encouraging words do you have for someone who's like young and just starting out into film, art, photography, anything of that nature?
No, go ahead. No.
I would say to listen to what is inside of you, what is driving you, what is the source that makes you want to do what you want to do, to pay attention to that. Technique is only one thing. Learning colors and film, all that's one thing. To express yourself, you have to connect to that inner spirit, which I call the heart. And when you connect with that, whatever you do, if you're connected to whatever it is you're seeing and looking at and making, if it resonates with you here, it will resonate with everybody else. Practice, 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 practice.
Yeah, I would add to that, and thank you, Adger, that then there's always that responsibility of, how do you proceed your next stage, and then how do you get to that next stage? And I think it's important to have a community of people who you are working with within the discipline or even outside the discipline. And then there's going to be ups and downs, and me, I'm a sociologist and study photography. So I think all of the various backgrounds that one has, I think actually helps you sort of will move down that channel or that path relative to your role, your future role in film or video, or like where you may like wind up. And they're going to be like trials and errors. It's just the nature, of it. But that's it for me in a nutshell. Maybe slide over.
Thank you. It's a great question, and I echo what my two friends here have shared as advice. And I would say also just do a lot of looking and that could be looking at films and photographs that have been made by others, artists that you like, documentarians that you like, creatives that you like, but also just, keep your eyes open wherever you are in the world. And that's when you're going to see something that inspires you to create. And just to kind of echo what you were saying too about a community, that, where you're in school and the connections that you can make between your friends and colleagues who are studying with you, your professors, find a mentor, find a sponsor, someone who's really going to help you to have your work shown, have your work placed, or to kind of maybe teach you a different technique, or to inspire you by, say, read this book. I mean, reading is something, it's not just looking, but it's also, doing a lot of reading, because that's another way that you will find material that you might want to then film or photograph. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think we're kind of, oh, Andrea, I'm sorry. Okay, Andrea will be our last question.
You know Andrea Jenkins? She's the first LGBT president of Minneapolis City Council.
Hello, my name is Andrea Jenkins, and I guess I'm just curious. I know that at one point in time, I think Frederick Douglass was considered the most photographed African American, period. And then subsequently later, Angela Davis was the most photographed Black woman. And she wrote extensively about photography as well. And so I'm just wondering if both of them being abolitionists, both of them being so widely representative through their image of African Americans, and just kind of what are some of your thoughts around the similarities of those two? Anybody?
I'm going to start, and this will be just a quick answer, and thank you so much for that brilliant observation. There's some who say that Frederick Douglass was, quote unquote, the most photographed man of the 19th century, hands down. Over President Lincoln, hands down. That's what has been said about him. And yes, he did write extensively about photography. One of the things that I love about what Angela Davis says, though, when she writes about photography, it's quite different. It's a completely different take. And many of the images of Davis that were circulated, of course, were circulated around the time when she was either running for her life and hiding, or when she was on trial. And, then you fast forward, say, 20, 30, 40 years, and she wrote in Deborah Willis's Picturing Us, she wrote about, her photographs and having been photographed. And she says, and I'm not going to get the, exact quote here, but she says that, out of all these images of me, what's so disheartening is that I'm just really remembered for a hairstyle, the afro, right? And that's how that's when I think about Davis writing about photography, that's what I often come back to, and that's an essay that I always, I'm sorry I can't remember the name of it right now, but I always teach that to my students, and people still do it to this day. That's all they can really think of is her as a hairstyle, as opposed to as our 21st century, our late 20th century, abolitionist. And I remember the first time that I met her was at a conference at UC Berkeley, when the work that she was doing around prison abolition was first being, sort of, I want to say, inculcated within a university that, really respects the work of activism and activists. And so the work around the prison industrial complex was shared not only through scholars, and activists like Davis herself, but also people who had been formerly incarcerated, students, and people who could actually take up the mantle of the work that she's done. So thank you so much for that brilliant question. I hope that helps this answer.
Well, I think Miles Davis is one of the most photographed people. I think Jack Johnson, for his time, is one of the most photographed people. You see, we have a lot of those images now. When photography became, the Kodak camera, a lot of people were taking pictures, not just photographers. And now the digital world is just crazy. Everybody's a photographer now, everybody. But I think the image, and talking about memory, the image is powerful in terms of memory, what you remember from what you see. Dreams, memory, you dream about something, and then something happens, That's a deep, deep, deep memory, dreams. And I think that there's a lot to be discovered yet in the power and the memory of dreams in our lives as humans.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for me to say thank you, Professor Cheryl Finley, and thank you, Herman J. Milliken Jr., and thank you, Adger Cowans, and thank you, Deborah Ultan.
And thank you, Howard Oransky.
Will the trustees come forward with the collection plates, please?
Thank you. No, I'm really staying there.
So great.